Welcome back to Northwest City Politics in the Know with Juanita. We're glad to welcome you back to our show again this week. We're always happy for people like you, people that are interested in the issues that are happening in our cities. Because good government needs people that are involved, that are following what's happening and sharing their thoughts and ideas with the mayors and city council people. So we're glad that you're with us again this week. If you haven't watched our show before, each week we'll have somebody on from one of the 9 cities in CCX's viewing area to tell us what are the current areas, aspects, problems that city council is dealing with. And then we encourage you to, if it's your city, take down the person's phone number and email and be in contact with them if any of the issues resonate with you. But from time to time, we'll go to other groups that affect all of our cities, and that's what we're doing tonight. We decided that we can't wait any longer to learn about what happened from the legislature and pass it along to you, even though things are still a little bit in flux on some areas. So we're very happy tonight to welcome Representative Michael Nelson from 40A to share his thoughts and ideas on the past legislative session and help those of you out there learn a little bit more about it. Now, you've been on our show, but not for a while, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself out to our wider audience. Tell them a little bit about yourself and your time in this district.
Good evening. I'm Representative Michael Nelson. I represent, as she said, 40A, which basically is Brooklyn Park, south of 85th and west of Xerxes. Although I do now have E3, Precinct E3, which is east of Xerxes. But anyway, I've been in this legislature. I've been first elected to the Minnesota House in 2002. So I've been serving since January of 2003. So this is my 8th term. I'm in my 15th year in the legislature. Before that, I was a carpenter. I worked both in the private sector and in the public sector. I also was a business agent before I got elected for the Carpenters Union, and like I said, that's who I am.
Well, we're very happy to have you with us tonight, and we always want the people out there to know, well, what happened in the legislature and touch base on, we can't touch base on every issue, but we've talked a little bit ahead of time and picked out some issues to go on. Now, in the area of education, I don't want to go into this in a lot of depth, but that money for our schools comes from 2 ways, from property taxes and referendums at the local level, but also from the state legislature. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the legislative funding that would help them understand it a little more.
And that's, again, our state constitution requires the state to fund schools so that all parts of the state have equal access to schools, and that's in our Constitution. There's also a little thing called state trust lands that when the state was surveyed out and divided up, there's 2 sections in every township that's through the state that are set aside as school trust land, and the money off of those have to go into the school fund. That's part of the way the state funds it. We also set money out of the general fund budget that we put to education, and we do that by a formula. And I'm not the expert on that formula, but basically you try and set that different school districts have different needs, and we try and meet those needs so that every school district can have equitable funding and provide roughly the same basic core things that are there. Some of the rural districts get more money for busing because they got longer ways to bus. Some of the more urban cities get more money for compensatory aid because you have more kids that are kids of poverty, more kids that are speak English as a second language, and we try and balance that out so that every child that goes through school, the school district, in their local school district, gets a good education and can go forward and participate and be productive citizens in the state of Minnesota.
So then what you see in the media, because they don't go into all this background that we talked about, is that you talk about per pupil funding, right?
And that's the funding formula, correct.
So what were some of the differences of opinions in this last session on how much should go into each school on the per pupil basis?
The governor, I believe, in his proposal, in his budget proposal, and I could be wrong there, I think he had 2.5, or he had 3%, I think he had 2.5% for a 2.5% increase in the per pupil funding.
Right.
And The first bill that came forward out of the House for the Republicans only had a 1%. Then they came back with a 1.5%. They finally, after the first bill was vetoed, the second bill came forward. We ended up with 2.5 and 2.5 for the 2 years of the biennium on the formula increase. Plus they had $20 million that was set aside for the early education, early childhood funding for the school districts.
And what were some of the opinions behind that difference?
Well, if you're some of the school districts that don't get a lot of compensatory aid, because in the formula there's a wide difference in what kids get, and I don't serve on the education committees, so I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. But some schools get less per student because they have less need. And there's always there's an argument that a kid is a kid is a kid. Every school district get the same, but some school districts have the ability to raise money through their property taxes easier than others. An example is the Brooklyn Center School District that for 7 years tried to pass a excess funding referendum and weren't able to pass it. So they were basically in statutory operating debt. And other districts, some of the more wealthy school districts in the metro area, they can pass a referendum, and a 1% increase in the referendum raises a lot more money than some districts that have less wealthy homes and less of a tax base. So that's what the formula is supposed to try and balance out, but like any formula, nothing's perfect. And there's always arguments about how you're going to tweak it here and there, and those get to be some very passionate arguments from different groups.
And then there's more policy issues that get entered into each year, and they vary from time to time. Now, one of the areas that there was something, a lot of talk about and some accomplishments was in the area of licensure of teachers.
Both parties, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, both parties, the big concern we have is we want to make sure we have qualified teachers in the classroom. And there's been a big push the last few years to get a lot more younger teachers in and teachers of color, because our demographics of our state are turning over, and they want to make sure that there's a belief that kids of color learn better from teachers of color, that they can see that there's somebody there in the classroom that looks like them. And so there's been a lot of things tried to do to get more people into the classroom that match society as a whole. And so they've tried to tweak licensing, because they've said, well, some of the times it's getting teachers in here, some of it is, and so they've tried to go to a tiered system where, and I don't know, because I don't serve on the education committee, so it's basically they got 4 tiers. The 4th tier is the people that have been there over 5 years. I believe it's over 5 years, and I could be wrong there. And then they can, unless they're been under a plan to get better, and that's not the right way to say it, but then they can't do it. But otherwise they can renew their licenses every 5 years without having to go through. Lower tiers are trying to let people that basically, some people that weren't teachers, served in the private sector and other jobs, that now they've decided in midlife, I want to go into teaching and try it, to allow them into the classroom. And again, it gets to this thing. We want to make sure we got good teachers, we've got qualified teachers, so that every kid in their 3rd grade class, they're only going to be in 3rd grade hopefully once, and that they get that education they need in 3rd grade, so that moving forward they can be successful, again, successful in schools and successful in life. And so, but there are differences of opinion how to do that and how to get teachers in the classroom and all that, and there's always a fight over that, different opinions on how to do that.
And then the sort of the same but different, because it deals with some of the same issues, is teacher tenure, because there's some strong differences of opinions on that area, right? Yeah,
there is, because there's also this, what I think is a false belief that you can't get rid of bad teachers.
And I agree.
That gets into that. And because I said, I've worked in the private sector, but I've also worked in the public sector. And where I worked in the public sector, I worked for a manager that loved firing people. And he, for whatever reason, he liked getting rid of people. And he was a nice guy otherwise, but he had this, I would say, is a personality defect in himself. And he proved that in the public sector, if you do the right things as a manager, you can get rid of a bad employee. Whether it's in the city of Minneapolis, or whether it's the state of Minnesota, the county, whatever. You can get rid of a bad employee if you follow the steps as a manager. But it's hard work and it's not fun work.
Right.
And so it's easier to throw up your hands and say, I can't do it. Same way with the teachers. They have processes to get rid of bad teachers, and a lot of times they blame the teachers union that you're trying to protect these. The teachers union don't want bad teachers in the classroom either, because that reflects on them. And in a lot of cases, they help school district try and transition people that aren't doing the job anymore or aren't good teachers to get them out of the classroom, because they understand also these kids only have one shot at every grade level to get that education they need, and they want to make sure that they have the best teachers in the classroom. And this last, there's been this, they call it LIFO, last in, first out, is the way it, which means the last person hired is the first person that gets laid off. And once you get to a certain point, you have seniority, and unless there's drastic cutbacks for whatever reason, teachers go that you'll have your job next year. And that's one of the things that in the school districts, at the end of every year, the lower rung teachers, they give them layoff notices, because part of it is they don't know first of next fall who's going to show up at their classroom. I may have, Osceola School District may have 2 5th grade teachers in a given school, but next year they don't need 2 5th grade teachers. So how do you adjust those without something you have to have some way to adjust that. And so that's part of the discussion. Currently, school districts currently the default from the state law is the last teacher hired is the first teacher fired. But if the school districts and the teacher union can negotiate different ways of doing that, more flexibility in that. But if they don't negotiate something, it falls back to the default of last in, first out. And that's, like I said, it gets controversial. And again, the goal, I think, on both sides is they want to get the best teachers in the classroom.
Last year, no bonding bill was passed, right? A bonding bill has to have a certain percentage of voters, right?
Right.
So it does take both groups to work together to come up with what you're going to do. So what are some of the differences of opinions that you saw about what should be bonded? And maybe mention too, what are the kinds of things that fit under this kind of bill?
Well, bonding bill requires, because it's borrowing, the bonding bill is we're authorizing the state to borrow money to build projects. And so it requires a supermajority of 81 votes out of 134 legislators to pass a bonding bill. Things that go into bonding bill, in the metro area here, in this district here, money for the 2 junior colleges, North Hennepin and Hennepin Tech. They both get money at that time for repairs and maintenance, new buildings, stuff like that. That comes through the bonding bill. We're building infrastructure, we're building buildings. There's money there for local roads. The Zane Avenue Bridge over 694 is a local road, and that's totally funded by the city of Brooklyn Park, because it doesn't have any entrances or exits to the freeway. So we have to pay for that. So there's a local road account that's in there that allows money to go to fund local roads around the state. Wastewater treatment plants, especially in the more rural areas. Wastewater treatment and water treatment plants to help keep our environment clean. That's stuff that goes in the bonding bill. Sometimes there's money in there for regional centers, for St. Cloud, Duluth, the deck, entertainment complex that got passed. So there's money that's gone to that, because that draws people from all over. But usually it's stuff that has to have local significance. A local park, like Hartkoff Park, would not be eligible to get it. But there are regional parks, and there are metro regional parks that they do, because some of that money goes in there. And there are individual projects that legislators bring forward, the further districts that bring forward. And there's usually, we could do a $10 billion bonding bill, which is way over what we should ever do. But we could do a $10 billion bill, and there would be projects that would get left out, because there's always more projects than we have money to do.
And so there was differences of opinion on how large a bill should, how large the bill should be. Maybe you can reflect on that.
Well, traditionally, and as before my time, because of the whole time I've been in the legislature, we've had a big bonding bill in the second year of the biennium, and a smaller one usually in the first year of the biennium. Those you know, every year we've had one since I've been there.
Right.
Last year we didn't pass one, and that just adds to the projects that are
Oh,
there that
yeah.
wait to get done. Last year would have been a bonding year. There were some, the speaker was said from the beginning of the session we weren't going to have a bonding bill this year. He
Right.
really started out saying, because this isn't a bonding year, this is a budget year. Next year we do the bonding. Then they came forward and said, okay, we'll do a $600 million bonding bill. And it was loaded up with a lot of projects and a lot of porky projects that were only in Republican districts. And then they raised it to 800, and it was just under $1 billion that we ended up passing. That through negotiations with the governor and to be able to get the votes needed to pass it, they ended up with almost $1 billion bonding bill. And again, this is infrastructure projects that'll be around that we will all enjoy around the state. That'll help everybody in the state, and that's what the bonding bill is supposed to do. We, according to our capacity, we had enough capacity to bond for up to $1 billion, and so that's kind of what we did.
And got one passed this year.
And got one passed this year.
In spite of the last minute rush at the end,
and
right?
actually that was one that once it started, last year the bonding bill didn't drop on our desk till 45 minutes before midnight.
Right.
And then got pushed through, and like I said, there were mistakes. This year there was more time, and there was good bipartisan work on that, and we got a bill that, like I said, it'll help all parts of the state, fortunately.
Now, another bill that's been coming up for a number of years, the Real ID bill, and maybe you can talk about what it is and why Minnesota didn't go along with it originally, because it's a federal thing. And
it's one of the reasons why bipartisanly that we voted back when it first came out, and this is some of the offshoots out of the 9/11. The planes crashing, to have secure IDs so that people boarding planes are who they say they are. And but there were some concerns, both the Democrats and Republicans. Like I said, it overwhelmingly we voted to stay out of it because we were afraid that the federal government would get this information, and different people from different sides were afraid the federal government would get a hold of this information and do things with it that it wasn't intended for. Some of the similar thing are happening with this voting commission that's going on right now with the federal government that we're concerned about giving up information to the federal government.
Data privacy.
Data privacy, yes. Now, when it going on, we have to pass this. We had to pass it by this year. Actually, we should have passed it last year, but pass it to. Otherwise, the federal government is finally going to enforce if you don't have a Real ID compliant driver's license or ID card, you won't be able to board planes for even domestic flights. And so we had to get it done. Now, back after we voted not to do the Real ID thing.
How long ago was that?
Oh, I got to remember that.
I can't remember.
It was back after 9/11. It was back after Governor Plenty was there.
Oh, a good 10 years or more.
A good 10 years ago, yes, that this came into effect. And we basically was waiting to get into this. Some of it, why we were waiting, is that some of the DMV stuff, as we've heard on the news, the DMV starting this weekend is going to be closed down because they're switching computers. Our old computers that handled that stuff couldn't do some of the stuff that the federal government wanted to do. So that was part of why some people voted to hold back on doing it till this DMV computers are up and running, new computers up and running. But like I said, there's a lot of reasons why we didn't vote for it. Now, as it came forward last year, there was a bill that was brought forward, and Representative Smith from Maple Grove carried the bill last year, and he carried the bill again this year. But there was language put into it that would have prevented non-documented people to get a driver's license. And that was what drug out and was the fight was about in this year and last year was not allowing non-documented people to have a driver's license. Well, these people are here. And that's the argument on both sides. I don't want they shouldn't be able to get a driver's license because they shouldn't be here anyway. We don't want to give them a license to be able to drive on our roads and get around. They shouldn't be here. But on the other hand, they're here. And they're here and they're driving on our roads. And right now they're driving on our roads without driver's licenses. And they're driving on roads because they don't have a driver's license. They can't get insurance. So they get in a car accident they're not covered, you're not covered, and it creates a big mess.
Oh, right.
And so do you want the public safety side, and I'm full on this side, the public safety side is, I want them, if they're going to be driving our roads, to have to pass a test, have to learn our rules, know what a stop sign is, learn that stuff, and be able to pass a written test and a driving test so that they know the rules, so when they're driving on our roads, they're there and they have insurance. There are the other side of it is, no, they're undocumented, or some people call them illegal.
Right.
But they're undocumented people here, and they shouldn't have a license whatsoever. Well, before they were able to get that, but one thing that, again, Governor Pawlenty, when he was in office, through the rulemaking process, put into rules, which is currently in the state of Minnesota, that these people can't get a license. They have to be proved that they're a citizen of the United States to get a driver's license. And there was language to take those rules that are currently on the books and put it into the statute. And that was kind of what the fight was on the Real ID bill, is that there was enough people that didn't want that language in there, and it wasn't necessary because it's already in the rules.
Okay.
And the rules have the same power as a law, so there was not necessary to do that. We did end up passing that, but then as part of the budget process, the shenanigans that went on with that, the language that was in the Real ID bill got put in the public safety bill and got passed and signed into law, even though there was a promise to take it out of the Real ID bill. And I don't know what was promised behind doors, that they said they wouldn't do it, but they did it.
So you never know how it's going to end.
You never know how it's going to end. But anyway, and after the governor did his rulemaking, Governor Pawlenty, there was changes that now, even after that, for them to be able to change those rules, we would have had to pass some legislation to authorize the Department of Motor Vehicles to change those, to do the rulemaking. And so, I don't know, technically, even though I didn't like the language being put in there in the public safety bill, we would have had to pass a bill anyway to do the rulemaking. So we're going to have to pass a bill to do that anyway. So
it's still an issue.
It's still an issue.
But the ID thing got solved.
The ID thing, and so that you and I that are citizens, when we renew our licenses now, we'll have to have more documentation to get that license renewed. But once we get that, we'll be able to use our ID to fly in an airplane. Without passing the Real ID, you would have had to get a passport and have that to be able to fly domestically, and you wouldn't be able to use your Minnesota ID as identification.
And I think Minnesota was the very last state, right?
I believe we were, we were one of the last. At the beginning of the session, we were one of, I think, 7 that hadn't passed it, and I think we were one of the last to pass it this year.
Right. And then I left issue towards last is Governor Dayton vetoed the funding for the legislature. And maybe you can give us a little background information. This is related to the budget bill that we talked about before, but maybe you can give a little information about that.
And it's not one budget bill; it's budget
bills.
It's budget bills, because you got each department of government, health and human services, public safety, education, transportation.
It covers the whole everything.
Every one of them has a budget bill they passed, and there's more of them that I can't rattle off the top of my head. But this is part of coming out of what happened in the special session, what happened with the budgets not being done. It was agreement that they'd have it done in a day. We'd be able to come in Tuesday after adjournment the next day, and all the budget bills be ready. We could read them and pass them and get it done and be done and be gone. That didn't happen. There was stuff that the governor, and I wasn't in those closed door meetings, but the governor had, my understanding, it had agreements that certain things were not going to be in there. Some of the things showed up in there that he didn't like the revenue department, which is normally in the state government finance bill. The revenue department was taken out. The funding for that was put in the tax bill because
poison pill.
A poison pill, because if the governor vetoed the tax bill, then the Minnesota Department of Revenue would be shut down July 1, and they wouldn't be able to collect your taxes. They wouldn't be able. There'd be no money to pay for the other bills. So, and the budget and so the governor was forced to sign the tax bill, even though there were a lot of provisions that he didn't like. And on going forward, if we have a surplus, we don't really need a tax bill because enough money's coming in to pay for what we're budgeting for. So we don't need to change. The tax bill changes the tax rates and changes things. And so technically we don't need that. So by putting that in there, forced the governor to sign it. Then he used his line item veto authority for the state government finance
Right.
bill. He line item vetoed funding for the legislature, which pays the legislature's salary, pays all our
Right,
staff's salary, pays the nonpartisan staff that works for the House and the Senate, pays all their salaries. And so he put that in there to basically saying, you want to get paid? You got to come back and talk to me.
Come back and talk some more, right.
Come back and talk some more and make some agreements on this
Right.
stuff.
So the next step after the veto.
Well, our governor wasn't the only one that did it. I believe
Oh,
it was
right,
Arizona.
right.
Their governor did the same thing, and they took it to court. Our legislature, the House and the Senate leadership, hired a lawyer, and they're suing the governor and saying, and it's gone to court, and they're working through the court system, that's saying the governor can't do that. He can't unfund a part of, because that's another branch of government, and it's a co-equal branch of government,
Right.
and therefore, I mean, he can't do that. That's not there. But the Constitution, the Minnesota State Constitution, allows the governor to line item veto spending items.
Right.
And that's one of the things that he can't line item veto policy items that get put in the budget bills. He has to veto the whole bill if it's bad policy that he doesn't want. But he can line item spending, say they're spending in there to buy Representative Nelson a brand new car in the budget. He could.
Right.
That's
Right.
wasteful spending. He could line item veto that
Right.
out, and rightfully so. But he can't. The way the bills were, he didn't want to veto all the budget
Right.
bills in the
Right.
special session, because if he had done that, June 30th,
Yeah.
government would have been in.
Right.
July 1, government would have shut down, parks would have closed for the
Right.
4th of July weekend.
Right.
There's things that we've had happen here in the past that aren't good, and there's a lot of employees across the state would have been laid off,
Right.
sent home without a paycheck. That's not good for the economy. It's not good for the state. It's not good for anybody. So he figured, I'll just line item veto the legislative funding. You guys now have incentive to come back and work with me to fix these things that I don't agree with going forward, and that's where we're at. Now we'll see
Right.
what happens with the lawsuit. If the governor wins, then they'll have to come back and negotiate with him. We'll probably have another special session. But this thing's worked out, pass it and beyond the way. Otherwise, the courts gave a 90-day stay so that we can function for 90 days until this gets settled. But if nothing happens at the end of that 90 days, unless he does another stay and goes farther, legislators won't get paid, our staff won't get paid. The people that we rely on to get the things done for the people of Minnesota will be gone, and it'll be interesting.
So that remains to be seen.
That remains to be seen, yes.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise in helping our audience out there get some ideas of the things that happen in the legislature and kind of a look behind instead of just what you see in the newspaper. So we want to encourage all of you to watch next week for part 2 on our 2017 legislative results. We're glad that you've been with us, and come back again. Bye.